Great. Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's really nice to be with you. I'm excited to talk this through today. I'm going to share my screen. I have slides to go through and we'll take a look at the reports. And I've got plenty of time for questions at the end. My goal in doing this project was to make this information useful to you and actionable to you. And so I hope by the end, if not already, it feels really practical. It feels like something you can wrap your mind around and help inform some of your steps for at least the next school year. All right, so make sure I'm sharing the right screen. All right, so as Catherine mentioned, I practice independently now. My previous work included work with the Crestory Network, where I was for 9 years and served as Chief Strategy Officer. What I do now in my consulting work is data, strategic planning, and program planning. And so what I really want to focus on what this project is about for me is really, we're collecting a lot of data, right? We asked you for a lot of information, but then how do we turn that into a practical planning resource? We are never collecting information just for its own sake. And so how do we make sure that we're responsive to that data, that we've used it for useful purposes and collaborative purposes, right? That this is a pretty transparent exercise where you all are opening up your programs to each other and thinking about what's working here that might be applicable to another school that is pursuing the same mission, pursuing the same goals. All right, so very briefly as a recap, right? The Global Dimensions Inventory, it's been around for a while.
It's been around for a while. It was developed.
Somebody echoing. If everybody can mute themselves. I'll test that. Anybody? It's always disconcerting to hear yourself back as you're. Okay, we're good. All right, so the inventory has been around for a while. The previous version asked you to truly do an inventory of programs, right, that fell under these 8 categories. And say, yes, we have that. No, we don't. Yes, we have that. No, we don't. And so that was sort of the starting point, is to see, to see what's going on at schools with respect to our understanding of what does it look like to really live out that call to global citizenship, right? And the Ignatian definition of global citizenship. So that was the beginning point. We started to do a revision. In the fall, we started to take a look at this. And what we wanted to do was break it up a little bit more so that it could be practical, right? That how can we take this long list of programs and understanding who does what, and then really hone in and make it relevant to schools and make it useful to schools. And so started by making it more complex, right? Adding subcategories, kind of break apart that a little bit more, get more specific, and then added in the self-assessment questions that you all took a look at when you were asking yourselves, how much effort do we put into this? How much do we prioritize this? So that was sort of the evolution from the straight inventory into thinking about, okay, what would it take to make this practical, to then be able to turn it around so schools can make use of it? And putting them into buckets like this, into these categories, was part of that process. And so that was the survey that you all did, right? So there are items. This one is curriculum and core or elective course offerings. And then you asked, or you indicated what level of effort you put into that, filled out the usual program inventory that you would have done previously. And then there's a question not visible here where we asked you about prioritization. And so really relying on those subcategories to kind of group our efforts and think about how we're working to implement this vision of global citizenship was the goal of this revised survey. So that was the idea. That's why this data was collected in this way. And in order to make it practical, in order to make it useful, we wanted to capture these 3 things, right? How much effort have you already put into this area? If you have really deeply dug into DEIB, right, and you've poured a lot of resources into that, that's helpful to know. Even if you don't have every single program on the checklist, but you've dug deep in that, that's going to help inform other schools. What's worked and what hasn't? What did you learn in putting forward that effort, right? And then what programs have already been set into motion? Because if I want to learn about putting into place an advisory committee or similar, it's really helpful to know who else has been down that path and to look at my own list and say, what haven't I checked off here that might be a good next step for us? And then finally, how much of a priority is this in the next 12 to 24 months? And the goal there was to say, okay, when you get this information back, this is a really large survey. It's a long inventory of programs. How do you kind of then, as a school, hone in and say, okay, this is what is actually going to make a difference to us. This is where we can focus. I operate under the assumption that no one can focus on everything in the course of the next year. It simply isn't practical. So this kind of helps narrow it. And hopefully in the report structure, you'll see, and as we walk through today, how these three questions, your effort, your programs, and your priority, help turn this into a report that makes practical sense and has practical implications for you. Right. So underlying all of this, couple of core assumptions I think about, which is one, no school can really prioritize everything at once. And your priorities may also be divided. You may be pursuing a capital campaign right now, or your school may be struggling with something totally unrelated to the global citizenship work. So it's really thinking about what are the practical priorities? What is going to be able to happen? So there was no implied assumption that everything should be a priority to everyone, right? Similarly, no school can maximize effort on everything at once. You know, if you said everything was going perfectly and we've totally put 100% effort into each one of those things, I'd push, nobody did that, but I would push back and say, you know, we all have sort of space to grow. We've all sort of said, this is going to be more useful to our school community at one time or another. And so there is no, again, no judgment implied there. I would just reinforce the idea that this report is a tool and not an assessment. So if you've indicated something is not a priority or it's minimal effort right now, that's not meant to be an assessment of your school. It's just an honest self-assessment with this isn't what we're focusing on right now, which is just a practical reality of there being so many topics of focus and this being just one component of who you are as a school and the mission that you're pursuing. So when I think about what I wanted to do with these reports, so how to think about this information, how to use the information, we're going to dig into some reports, but my hope is that you're able to use it for some planning for next year, and that it's reaching you at a point in the year when you're thinking about what you can pursue in the next year. And so thinking about what's important to me, right? And really reflecting on those priorities, saying, this is the highest priority, this is a strong priority. That helps us avoid that scattershot. I'm going to try a little bit of everything effort, right? And maybe not being as successful at any of them. So hopefully this helps get us focused. And as such, I only included those areas that you identified as priority or high priority in your reports, avoiding that information overload. I also hope that these reports help you think about where have you already made progress, right? You may see a place where this is a high priority, but it's also a place where we've put in a ton of effort and resources, and we might be happy sustaining our current performance there. That's a great thing to just identify and be able to check that off and say, okay, this is a sustaining effort. It's not something I have to really dig a lot of mental energy into. It's not a new priority, it's a sustained priority. And then lastly, and probably the piece that requires to dig in the most is then how do I identify next steps on those things that might be new priorities, or if they're not new, might be things I really do want to dig into, right? It's a high priority for me, but we haven't made progress yet. And that's what you can really use this for, is to think about where are those opportunities, who else is working on some of those things, and what ideas can I get from peers that have prioritized it, have made progress in that area. So when you think about sort of how you can use this information to plan for the year ahead, sort of clarifying priorities, you know, self-assessing progress, and then really identifying some next steps with the global work. All right, so when you received your report in your email, I have a bunch of screenshots here just so I could zoom in big enough and talk through some examples. And I will show you some reports as well. I'll open some reports from the front page, but What you see first in your report is a front page that's sorted by your own prioritization. So this is what you said, where we say highest priority, priority, somewhat a priority, and not a priority, right? And so each one of those groups, just like you see here, you see each one of the issues that you identified in this case as priority, and then how much effort did you say that you were already putting into that area? So at this school, structures for planning and learning is a priority for that school, but it's an area that right now has minimal targeted effort or investment, where making Jesuit education accessible is also a priority and for that school and has received a high level of targeted effort or investment. So this is sort of a reflection back with a different view of the information that you put forward in your survey, stripping out all the programs, but just focusing on those categories of items. For every topic that you identified as priority or high priority, you have a follow-up page. There's more information there. For the things you identified as not a priority or somewhat a priority, you don't have the follow-up information. We can get that to you if priorities change, but the idea was just to give you the information that you identified as priority. All right, so I do want to cover before we go too far is, as you read these, you're going to be like, you're inevitably going to see things that say, that's not what I meant, or I can't believe we clicked that, or that's not right anymore. I don't know why we clicked priority. That's not really minimal. What I would say is these reports are for you all and for you alone. So you are quite welcome to disregard pieces that you see in them, mark them up. If there's something, if you want to show this report to a board member and need something corrected, feel free to drop me a note. It's not a huge lift for me to do that, but don't feel like it has to be a 100% constantly to the minute accurate report. This is for your benefit. This is not meant, as I said before, as sort of an assessment process. And so really, you can feel free to move things from category to category as priorities change, and use it flexibly. Use it as a tool for yourself and not an assessment. And don't get caught up if you see things that no longer feel accurate. We're all filling these out at a point in time, and things inevitably do change. All right, so once you get past the first page, or excuse me, we're going to start again at the first page and really dig into our report. I want to walk you through the logic of how I could see this being used, right? So I'm on my first page. Here are the issues that I identified at my school as highest priority: structures for planning and learning, programs to honor other cultures, and making Jesuit education accessible for the under-resourced students. What I see is that structures for planning and learning, right now, we have not really put a lot of effort or investment into that. It's a priority for next year. It's the highest priority. We haven't dug into that yet. So that is a place to start, right? I don't have to start that way, but it makes sense for me to say, okay, what else can I learn about what's happening with structures for planning and learning? Because that's a place where we really have room to grow and we want to put some efforts in if this is truly of the highest priority. So then you'll go to that page in the report. So structures for planning and learning has its own page in my report, and I'm going to see each one of the programs that falls under that focus area. And I'm going to see this checklist. Yes, no, we've started this as a school. So for my hypothetical school, it's no's all down the line. And then I'll see how many schools have already initiated this. Basically, how popular is that program across all schools, right? And so what I am noticing here is that grade level or departmental interdisciplinary themes, about 2/3 of all schools that filled this out said that they are implementing that. And that's by far the highest. So that might be a promising place to start. If most of my peer schools have initiated that program, I haven't done anything in that space. So I'm looking to sort of just start to make some headway. That might be a really promising place to start. So I'm going to think about those interdisciplinary themes. So then on the same page of the report, I can go down, and this is going to show me a list of all the schools that said structures for planning and learning are an area that we've already invested a lot. We have a high level of effort and investment in this target area. And I'm going to see this list of schools that said, yes, this is a high area of investment for us. And I will see that 3 of those schools have also implemented this grade level theme. So I've got this grade level themes in my mind as a potential program. I can see there are 3 schools there that have already implemented that and say that this is an area where they've really dug in as a school. And so those would be 3 potential peer schools that I might want to give a call, reach out to, learn from, ask how they've done with implementing this program. Below that, I'll see a different list of schools. These are schools that said structures for planning and learning are also a highest priority item for us. So these might be schools to sort of collaborate with, co-create with, think about how can we learn from each other as we both dig into this area. And there are also schools on that list that have implemented this program that I'm interested in. And so, you know, following this logic, starting at the very front page, I identified a priority topic area. I looked at it, I said, is there some sort of low-hanging fruit program? Who can I learn from to get better at figuring out how that might work at my school? And who can I collaborate with who's already had some experience there? So that's the idea. That's sort of the logic of walking through it in the sort of most basic way. The last piece on that page that focused on structures of planning and learning is there was a fill-in for other. To say, what else have you done in this area? And so I might be thinking about this and saying, oh, you know what? World literature, I have a really strong world history program and world literature program. Co-planning between those two might also be a really nice way for me to make this happen. I'm going to reach out to Christ the King in Chicago and learn more about how they've structured that. Or I can already envision how to do that, and this just kind of gives me some ideas. So there's a list here of what else has happened at other schools, what other schools identified that responded to that fill-in option. So hopefully that gives you an idea of a really straightforward way to walk through each one of the areas. Now, it's never going to be that sort of crystal clear every single time, but hopefully we're able to use reports to identify areas that would benefit from new ideas. So I had an area where we hadn't made progress yet, right? But it's a priority for us. And then identify a program that could be a good next step and identify peer schools to learn from. That's what I was able to do using the report. Right. So that's sort of best case scenario. You're going to see other things when you open your reports, right? I looked through all of them as I was creating them, and there's a variety of sort of scenarios. So I wanted to talk through them so you can just kind of think about how you want to interpret the information for your own school, right? So here's a snapshot of one. This is a school that everything on their high priority list was already high effort, right? It's not as neat and tidy as saying, here's a high priority item where we have no effort yet. And that's a really clear-cut way for us to dig in. This is saying everything we've prioritized, we've already really dug into. That means your priority and your investment are already aligned. That's a terrific place to be, right? And so there's a few next steps that I would suggest if you're in this place, if you're looking at a chart that looks like this and saying, okay, I want to focus on what I can do next year and how we can keep making that incremental gains, but this doesn't suggest to me any clear areas of focus. So first is a gut check, right? Is your self-assessed level of effort or investment accurate, right? Or is one of these sort of weaker than the other? Yeah, we really pushed on educational programs about DEIB, but if I think about it, our structures probably are middling effort, right? And maybe that just points you in a direction. But if you say, no, really, all of these are high level of effort, the next step would be to think about results. Are we getting out of our structures around DEIB, our educational programs around DEIB, our social justice service encounters? Are we getting the results that we want out of those programs, or are any of them seeming to fall short even though we're fully engaged in that work? And so you might identify one to say, actually, you know what? We have been offering these social justice and service encounters. We have a ton of money and staff invested in it, and still we're just not making the gains in that we'd expect. So that might be instead point you in a place to start. You know, your goal is to start somewhere, right? Because it's hard to look at all of these things simultaneously. So I would start to look at results, and are you satisfied with the results of these priority areas? if you feel like you're already fully invested in them. Another thing you might see is this, which I saw with a few schools, which is we prioritized everything, right? Here's a school that identified every single one of those subcategories as the highest priority, with varying levels of effort or investment. And so if you're looking at your report and saying, oh gosh, we're looking at everything as the highest priority, right? That doesn't break your report up into nice sort of digestible chunks. Instead, you've got sort of something a lot more unwieldy. And so you can do that by focusing in yourself and saying, okay, these may all really truly feel like a high priority for our school. So let's think about, where do we want to see new or increased effort in the next school year, right? And does asking that question a little bit differently help us identify which one of these are actually priorities, where we want to see new or increased effort in the next year? So all of these might be important to our school as values, but some may be priorities for action. And changing that question can sometimes help you narrow this list down. So if you're looking at a list like that, really thinking about where do we want to see action in the next school year that would be new or different. You can also, of course, look at the current level of effort, right? Here's a school where they've had minimal efforts in structures to institutionalize DEIB. That may also just imply, okay, well, that's the place to start. We start with the ones that are pink or red or lighter green. So there's a few different ways to think about it, but I really suggest trying to get it to smaller chunks, trying to get it really narrowed down and think about, where do we want to invest and how do we make this information most useful? That's going to be in identifying, where do we want to see progress and need new ideas. We need to know which peers we can rely on. We need to think about new programs. That's what the value of the information that you receive really is. All right, another thing you might see when you dig into the report is deeper, right, on your programs page. This is your programs around a sustainable school, environmentally sustainable school. You know, you might say, this is the highest priority for us. We don't feel like we've fully dug into this or invested, but this programs list, we're yes, 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 all down the line. We've really done all the programs on the list. So does that mean there's nothing I can gain from this? The only two things I haven't done are fossil fuel divestment, which nobody's done and just isn't on the table for us, or the third party recognition, which, for whatever reason, doesn't feel like it's going to be feasible for my school this year. But really, maybe I just don't have anything to gain from this report. I want to focus on this area, but I checked the box on all these programs. I don't know where to go from now. What I would think about then is also the level of your own implementation. And again, thinking about results. Are we happy with how all of these things are going, right? So I may see this sustainability committee and say, yeah, we have a sustainability committee. But when I go through this list, I think, you know what? It's not exactly clear what their charge is. It's not exactly clear what their agenda is. So maybe there's still room for me to learn from peers on that place. So within this list of programs, really thinking, is there something here that I'd like to get better at, even though I have it in place, right? My green doesn't automatically mean it's 100% perfect. So I've got a sustainability committee, not super happy with it. I'm going to reach out to other schools that have prioritized this area, invested in this area, and do have a sustainability committee, and see what they're doing, see how they've structured that, right? So kind of working past that initial reaction to say, just because we have yeses here doesn't mean that there's not still sort of a next level of information that you could use the report for, and think a little bit more about how your programs might adapt. All right, so I want to go into two examples. Okay, I pulled them up separately on my screen. I want to walk through two examples like live, so you can see on our actual report what it would look like. So this is the report, type of report you all received, is a PDF and has your school name on it, and it has your highest priority items, your priority items, somewhat a priority, and not a priority, right? And so We're looking at St. Ignatius High School in Cleveland. I have not consulted with them, so I'm gonna, make some assumptions and make some things up, but just show an example of how we might think about using this report. So if I'm at St. Ignatius High School, I'm seeing, reducing negative ecological impacts of the school is an area where we've put some targeted efforts or investment, relative to the other things that are our highest priority, where we've already dug in a lot of efforts or investment. So this might be the place that I want to start when I'm reading through this report and thinking about, okay, what's going to help me plan for next year really well? I would like to do more with this ecological impacts of the school. So I'm going to scan really fast, go to that page, right? So everything I indicated was a highest priority or a priority has a subpage. I'm going to come to that program, reducing the negative ecological impacts of the school, and think about what my opportunities are here, right? I might think about, okay, I'd like to do more with our composting program. We're barely getting much out of it. And so 38% of schools are already doing that. I might come down here and say, okay, I can see that Brophy, Fordham, and St. Bonaventures all have a composting program in place. So that gives me a place to start. There are schools that are highly invested in the ecological impact of their school. That gives me some folks to call and brainstorm about the efficacy of a composting program, right? I also have schools that have highly prioritized this, like me, and can see which schools have a composting program that have highly prioritized this topic area and might have some ideas as we think about how we want to really lean into this part of our work in the course of the next year. And then other ideas, if I otherwise I'm just kind of thinking about what else could we do as a campus. Maybe I'm thinking, okay, green club or waste audits, aquaponics sounds really interesting. Looking through this list and coming up with some additional ideas to put on my research list, to call colleagues and think about as I do my plan for next year. So that's sort of an example of, in 3 to 5 minutes, thinking through how do I use this in a really practical way as a school. Another example, zoomed in, that we could look at is Verbum Dei Jesuit High School in Los Angeles, right? So this is a school that didn't identify anything as highest priority and have a handful of things identified as priority, right? So this is a pretty tight list of things that are priority for the school. And many of them, most of them already have aligned levels of effort. We've dug into technology is an important area for us. We have a high level of effort. Partnerships with community organizations, we have a high level of effort. Something that has only some targeted efforts, right, is intercultural dialogues at school. And so using sort of the same logic, I'm going to say, okay, well, that's a place where we could probably make a little bit more progress. It's a priority for us. We can come down to where that is in the report. Titled here, Intercultural Dialogues at School, and see a list of the programs that fall under that area. There are some that half of schools are doing virtual collaborative programs, and we're not doing virtual collaborative programs at Verbum Dei. So maybe that's something I would want to think about for next year. And there is a whole list of schools in this column that are doing virtual collaborative programs that have put a high level of investment into this area. And I could, say, oh, I actually connected with someone at BC High, so that is a good lead for me. Let me contact them and learn about what their virtual programming looks like, right? And you have other colleagues down here that have likewise prioritized intercultural dialogues, which might suggest some opportunities to collaborate. And then those other ideas, what else is out there, folks that I could steal or borrow ideas from. So that's, again, the idea is to be able to make some of these things pretty quick, but to be able to say, what do I know about my own priorities and how our investment aligns? And then what does that mean for how I can use this information to improve my programming in the year ahead in a way that feels achievable? All right. So before we sort of swap to questions, I do want to say that you will be getting after today a little bit more information if you are not yet overloaded. It would be sort of a totally optional amount of information. There'll be a network overview report available in Excel to you. And this is going to give you, I'm going to bring it up now, an overview of all of the results together. So that you can take a look network wide as to what are the trends, what else is happening out there, right? And so this may be interesting information, and if you're a real data geek, you may dig into this and say, okay, this really gives me a sense of how I might set my own priorities. If this looks totally overwhelming to you, then I would stick with your school level report. There's nothing extra here that's gonna change how you program into the next year, but it might be interesting as you reflect collectively on where we're going. So what you see here is each one of the categories in each row, and then the aggregate amount of effort that's being put into those things, and the ratings of priority that's being put into these things. So you can see that 97% of schools, almost everybody, said that social justice and service encounters are either a priority or a very high priority. And little over 2/3 of schools said that we also have a really high level of effort going into social justice and service encounters, right? There's a lot of interest in terms of prioritization in the DEIB work, structures to institutionalize DEIB, programs for honoring other cultures, educational programs about DEIB. But it looks like only relative to the priority, right? About 80% of schools think that that's really important to them. A lot less have said that they've been able to put a real high level of effort into that. So that may suggest, opportunities as a network to dig in a little bit more into what that practice might look like and how to continue honing it. So there's good information here. It's not narrowed down to the school level, but it's for your collective reflection as a group of schools about where are most people saying as a priority. You may look at this and see where you're different or similar from sort of the collective. Or if you're thinking about how should I prioritize, this may have implications for you. The second piece of the network report that you'll receive is just a straight inventory. This is a big spreadsheet. Each school is in a column, and all of the different topic areas are across on the side here or in each row. So this says what is the effort for core and elective or course offerings. That's the topic areas, core and elective course offerings, your effort level, your priority level, and then the programs, each one of the programs. So who has what? So on your individual reports, you're going to get this little snapshot only for schools that said this is a high priority for us, or this is an area where we're really invested. If you are desperately dug in on, let's say, a global citizenship anchor or foundation class, and you really want to hone in on that, you may need to come to this spreadsheet to find out not just those highly invested schools, but everybody who's implemented this program. So this is sort of a backup reference sheet. If there's a specific program that you really wanted to dig into and you're not getting what you need in terms of who's done it off of your individualized report, this would be the place to come to really get that more detailed information. So again, the applicability in an individual school setting is going to be limited to those areas where you really need a deeper level of detail. I've tried to provide pretty much all that you need in the individualized school report. But know that you'll have this as a backup so you can look up who has dug into those interdisciplinary themes and get everybody listed on there so that you can take a look and make those connections when necessary. So that'll be available to you as an Excel, in an Excel format. All right, so I'm about to wrap up and open for questions. So I just kind of want to give you summarized my suggestions for your next steps. So step one, I would say determine what it is that you really want to work on. That starts with the first page of the report. Do we have alignment between our priority and the degree of effort? So if it's a high priority area with low effort, that's great. That's an area that's ripe for investigation. If you're already aligned, where do you want to focus on results? So figure out which one of those topic areas is something you want to dig into. And then second, you're going to identify your programmatic next steps. So you go to those deeper report pages, What programs are you not yet implementing that are popular, right? That have a high percentage of schools implementing them? Or who has already implemented those programs that we can learn from? What other ideas are out there in that category? And we walked through a few examples that hopefully make that clear. So that's the idea. If you're sort of leaving this thinking we've gone over a whole lot of information, my hope is that you can boil it down to sort of these two next steps, which is use that first page to think about a category you'd like to dig into, and then go hone in just on that page and really think about, are there implications for who I can call and what I can try to make for more progress in this particular area of focus as we kind of continue to make those, again, those incremental gains towards towards our shared mission. All right, so with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and see all of you. And I'm happy to take any questions.